Welcome to the Angelus Theater and the 2023 Utah Hauntings Contest, celebrating 10 years of resurrecting the ancient art of oral storytelling, keeping alive the spooky and or the scary, and filling audiences with bone-chilling wonder and spine-tingling suspense. Tonight, we have 7 twisted, demented, and spooky and or scary storytellers for you. Some of the Utah's very best, including 2 featured tellers and 5 competitors. We will begin with our featured performers. Each story must be less than 10 minutes, so if you have a short attention span, just stay tuned. First up, to thrill you tonight, is Page Funk, as in the funk of 40,000 years. Now sit back and enjoy Paige Funk's crispy, classic, character-driven storytelling. Paige's stories are thought-provoking, enchanting, and you can expect the unexpected.
Deep in the heart of the teardrop forest, in a place where no light can touch, there's a treasure buried beneath the ground that is said to bring the finder luck. Beware, for the path is perilous. Beware, there is toil and strife. Beware, for the forest is envious. Beware, the trees covet your life. This is the story that I heard at my grandmother's knee, the one that she learned from her grandmother, and that I have passed down to my grandchildren, and that they will pass to theirs. I am the head woman of a small village right on the edge of the teardrop forest, so named for the unique shape of the trees. These trees grow so closely together that there is not a path through the forest, and if you were to go in, you would have to find your way very carefully. But we do not go in to the forest. And this is the story that the poem, the rhyme, the story that we tell to remind our villagers that it is unsafe. But children grow up. They decide that they need adventure. And so they leave our safe, tight-knit village and go out into the world. They know that they are to not tell the story of the forest, for if they do, searchers will come. And we cannot be responsible for what happens to them. But nevertheless, these loose-lipped 20-somethings will go, and they'll tell the story, and the searchers will inevitably come. They come with their supplies on their backs, and they go into the forest, but they never, ever come back. One such young man came into our village, but he was different. His pack was larger than any of the others. He had planned everything. He was so very prepared. He had a shovel, he had a pickaxe, he had his pack, and he was ready. But he refused to go into the forest until he had learned everything he could learn about the legend. And so, as if he were one of my own grandchildren, he sat at my knee and he listened. Deep in the heart of the teardrop forest, in the place where no light can touch, lies a treasure buried beneath the ground that is said to bring the finder luck. Beware, for the path is perilous. Beware, there is toil and strife. Beware, for the forest is envious. Beware, the trees covet your life. He, unlike most of the others who come, listened more carefully. He made it past the treasure itself and heard the warnings that we gave him. And he decided that what he really needed was a guide. I need to search. Could someone from your village please come in with me and guide me to the clearing? I, as the head woman, I took it back to my council. Never before had I sent one of my people into the forest. It was unsafe. It was unfair. And the council agreed, except that in our tradition, in the lore, the legend, searchers must be allowed to search. And so I agreed that I would take him. I made sure that all was well with my village, and we went into the forest. As I said, it is a very tight squeeze. And so you find yourself meandering and wandering, keeping away from the trees as best you can. At one point, he saw a pack lying against a tree, and he went to grab for it. No. Do not touch the pack. Do not touch the trees. That pack is theirs now. And so we kept going in and out, every twig, every branch, and it seemed as if as we went, the trees were coming in closer and closer. But we made it to the small clearing right in the middle, just a circle. But the canopy over that, there is no light. There, dig there. So he took out his shovel and he began to dig and dig and dig. Will you not help me? It is not for me to find the treasure. And dig and dig and dig. Dig and dig and dig, and whoosh! A great wind came through the trees and knocked the young man into the hole that he was digging. And the wind came and covered up that hole. And I picked up his pack and his shovel and his pickaxe, and I turned my face toward home. And the trees parted, leaving a perfectly straight path for me to follow. And so I walked down that path, and as I went, I collected other packs that were being held by the tree branches. You see, nothing grows in our village, as we are in the dark of the forest. And next year, we'll send off more loose-lipped 20-somethings so that we can feed our people another year. For you see, deep in the heart of the teardrop forest, in the place where no light can touch, lies a treasure buried beneath the ground that is said to bring the finder luck. Beware, for the path is perilous. Beware, there is toil and strife. Beware, for the forest is envious. Beware, the trees covet your life.
Our second featured storyteller to begin the evening tonight is the terrifying Stephanie Roth. Stephanie Roth tells a variety of stories and delights in all things spooky and or scary this time of year. You can find her at storypossibilities.com. Stephanie Roth.
It was the early 1990s. Sabrina was one of those girls who was easily overlooked. It wasn't because she wasn't pretty. She was beautiful. But she had been 2 years in college and hadn't been asked on a single date until Carl came along. Carl was one of those young men who just attracted attention. He could join any crowd and fit right in, and he noticed Sabrina right away. Her roommate said they didn't feel comfortable around Carl, but she knew it was just because he was so handsome and that he liked her. They both lived on campus, and so they walked everywhere they went, and it was fall. The bonfires were going. It was where all the college kids gathered. And she and Carl went to the bonfire, and he began to regale a story about a haunted rocking chair that continually creak, creaked. Everyone was watching, and she held on to his arm, knowing that the spotlight was not only on him, but on her as well. He finished the story, and couples began leaving the bonfire. And Carl turned to her and said, "So, what would you say if I told you the story was true?" Seriously? There's a haunted rocking chair that creaks? Wow. Yeah. You want to go see it? Yeah, of course. Didn't you say you had a truck? Do you happen to have the keys on you? Well, sure, yeah, let's go see it. And so they went to her truck, and he began to drive into the mountains, into the woods. At first, there was all kinds of headlights coming toward them, but the farther and longer they drove, the less headlights they saw. Until Carl pulled off onto a dirt road, and it was bumpy, and she kept giggling about all the funny things about the woods at night. And he kept telling her scary stories. He finally parked the car and came around the side to open the door, always the gentleman. He looked at Sabrina and he said, "I'm afraid you're going to get cold. Let me see if I've got anything." And he began to dig deep into his pockets of his jacket, and he pulled out a bright white hat. "Here, put this on." And so she did. And then he dug into his pocket again, and he pulled out white gloves and a white scarf. He wrapped the scarf around her gently, and as he did, he touched her cheek and leaned over and kissed her on the forehead. She blushed. "Thank you. I think I'll be fine now with gloves and hat and scarf." All right. He turned on a flashlight, and they began to walk, and immediately, whoa! She fell into a ditch. Well, you could have told me that the ditch was here. She tried to pull herself up, and she was covered with leaves, and he just laughed. "Oh, I could have, but you have the most adorable scream. Come on." He shone the flashlight on the trees, and the light caught a ribbon tied around the tree. It was one of those reflective orange ribbons. He said, "Oh, I tied ribbons on the trees so that I could find this place again. It's so fantastic. Come on, let's go." And they went further into the woods. It was a moonless night, and every single twig that snapped, she jumped, and he laughed, and they went deeper into the woods. And they kept going, and she kept talking, and suddenly the light went out. She looked, and it was so dark she couldn't see anything. "Carl, this is not funny. Where are you? It's so dark out here. Carl. She took a step forward, and oh! She bumped into him, and it scared her so badly she fell on the ground. Carl turned on the light right under his chin and said, "Boo." "You do scare easily, don't you?" He helped her up. "Yeah, that's not funny. I get the flashlight." "I was hoping you would say that." He handed her the flashlight, and she began shining it on the trees, looking for the reflective ribbons. She kept talking and chatting about how did he ever find this place, and where was that rocking chair anyway? And she realized that he was pretty quiet. She whipped around, and he wasn't there. Carl, come on, seriously, Carl, where are you?" She kept looking, and as she did, she noticed she couldn't see any reflective ribbons. Okay, I guess this is all part of the experience. She put the flashlight ahead, and there was the tree with the reflective ribbon, and underneath it there was a white paper that had been nailed to the tree. She went up and it said, "You're almost there. I'll meet you at the house. Carl." He's probably going to set up the rocking chair, that haunted rocking chair. Okay, fine. So she kept going, and it wasn't long before she came to a clearing, and there she shone the light, and there was the house that he had described, the roof that sagged and the bricks that were crumbling on the sides, all of the windows broken, the tattered curtains moving in and out like a breath, and there on the dilapidated porch, just like he had described, was a rocking chair. Creak, 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 creak. Huh. That's pretty good. She went forward toward the house, looking, waiting for him to jump out and scare her again. But he didn't. She walked up to the door and it creaked open. She shone the flashlight around the room looking for him so that he wouldn't startle her, and that's when her light hit the floor. And there along the perimeter of the floor was women's clothing, all laid out in perfect outfits, all around the edge of the floor. And when she turned to the one beside her, there was a white coat and nothing else. Okay, it's kind of weird. She shone the light, and there was a table in the center of the room, and she just caught the glint of her keys. She ran to her keys, and underneath her keys was a note. "Sabrina, now the game begins. If you can get to the truck before I catch you, you'll be safe. If not, sorry." Okay, seriously. This is just a joke, right, Carl? Carl, seriously? She took her keys and headed toward the door. Whether this was a joke or not, this was just too creepy. And as she walked through the door, she felt something tug on her scarf. Wait! She unwrapped herself and began to run toward the woods. And that's when she realized, I'm wearing a bright white hat. I'm wearing gloves. He gave them to me. She kept the flashlight in her hand and tugged the glove off with her teeth. She pulled off the hat and kept running into the woods. She had to find the truck. She had to find the truck. This was just some kind of joke. This was really a terrible joke. He was probably at the truck. She kept running and then realized the light. She turned off the flashlight and threw it down and kept crashing through the woods, running as fast as she could. She tripped over a branch and fell hard. She scooted up to the tree and stood up slowly and just listened. She felt warmth, a moist breath on her cheek. Sabrina. She kept running as fast as she could. She had to get to the truck. What was happening? This... 2 weeks later, the search and rescue team finally found the truck, parked along the side of the dirt road. The passenger door was open, and there were keys on the front seat.
Our first performer tonight in the competition is going to be Melva Gifford. Melva has performed on Story Mine Radio Show, Weber State Conference, and Story Crossroads. She's also competed many times on the stage here at the Liars and Hauntings contests. Melva Gifford, ladies and gentlemen.
The Wild West was a hard time, a dangerous time. It was said that justice was offered at the point of a gun. In 1832, there was a law decreed that anyone that wanted to go ahead and occupy land, the Homestead Act, that they could go ahead and leave the United States, go out into the West, claim 1,600 acres of land. And if they could make that land prosperous in 5 years, that land is theirs. Two brothers decided to find their future wealth through their ranches. The older brother, Lyle, had his ranch on the Colorado River and raised horses. His younger brother, Tar, his family had a ranch right next by, and they raised cows. As they were building up their ranches, the wife of Tar, she was very lonely. Monta missed the city life. She missed just the cultured life. She couldn't go to plays. She couldn't go to musicals. She really got homesick, and she confided her woes to her best friend, the wife, Wendy, of Lyle. The first couple of months, she told her woes, complained privately, and her husband noticed that she was very unhappy. One afternoon, he took her to a very beautiful spot, scenic spot on the ranch. The trees were waving their gentle leaves in the breeze. It was a beautiful spot, very scenic. And he says, "Give me 5 years, Monta, give me 5 years. And I promise you that once we become wealthy in those 5 years, you will live a life of leisure and comfort. If I don't achieve it in 5 years, we'll move back to the city, if you'll only help me." She agreed. They continued to build the ranch. The first year was hard. The second year was hard. But the third year, they began to prosper and kind of learn the tricks of raising cattle. And the end of the third year, Tar invites Lyle and his wife to dinner. Monta bakes a wonderful roast and puts it on the table, and there's wine glasses. Lyle has always been a bit envious and jealous of the success of his younger brother. "Wine glasses, ha, you must be celebrating. We have," Tar says, 100 cows, and this spring, 400 calves will be added to that livestock. We have accomplished our goals. He hugs Monta. They're very happy. They continue their evening, and finally, at the end of the evening, Lyle tells the two of them, "Be careful, there is bear sightings around the areas. Livestock is being lost. Watch out for your cows." Some of the town people are so worried that they've actually created traps on different paths leading to the lake. But don't worry, they're marked. Thank goodness a bear can't read. And at the end of the dinner, the Beaumont Sr. and Wendy go home, and life continues. A week later, Monta is preparing dinner, and there's a knock on the door. It is the foreman. "Mrs. Beaumont, your husband's horse came back without a rider. We've been branding cattle, and he's nowhere to be found. We've been looking for hours. Where are you located?" And she found out that they were near the special spot, the nice little canyon, the private area that they had met earlier 3 years ago. And she says, "I'll help you find him." They go looking around. They go to the special spot of 3 years past. They're going down a trail, and they find a trap. The ground has been dipped, and there's a pit. They find the pit, and in the pit is her husband's body, spiked. This was supposed to be identified. There's no markings to tell us that there's a trap here. And she bawls of the loss of her husband. They take the body home, and as they take it home, they call the sheriff. He witnesses the death, and they bury the body. Next morning, Manta has gathered the bloody clothes of her husband. She wants to wash them and to burn them in a pyre in honor of her husband. She goes to the special place. She goes to the edge of the river. She's weeping. And as she places the clothes by the river edge, and tears fall from her cheeks onto the current of the river, she hears, Is the river singing? Is it moaning? And yet she felt comforted as if it was condolences to her death of her son, of her husband. As she puts the water into the clothes into the water, long strands of blood seep and bleed from the material and go deep, deep, deep into the water, stretches until it becomes pink. As she's washing and crying, she wonders, I'm now alone, a widow, and my son has no father. Should I go back to the city? And then she remembers the beautiful sunrises. She remembers the gentle mooing of cows and how comforting it is. And she remembers the giggles of her son as he plays around in the front yard. She presses her hand on the wet mud and she says, I'll stay. The mud was cool, but then it warmed to her touch. She's surprised, but she continues to wash the clothes. Downriver, a half mile, or 3 figures riding horses, Lyle and Wendy Beaumont. And behind them, a banker, a very prestigious banker from the city. In his pockets, he has gold, laying down the pockets. The gold that the 3 of them have conspired to buy the ranch of Manta at a very reduced price. The rancher is a very nervous, the banker is a very nervous fellow, and he says, are you sure that no one will know that your brother was murdered in the pit? No one will know, Lyle says. It's all been arranged. Before we dug that pit that killed my brother, my men and I went into the mountains. We captured a bear. We brought it back. And last night we killed it and took the carcass to the town. People labeled us as heroes. And also, Wendy says, I have been working on Manta, telling her, reminding her of all the pleasures of the city. And now, wouldn't she want to return home? And when I tell her today that maybe she's returned home, as you guys will tell her, her property is actually heavily in debt. It's not a prosperous ranch. Certainly she will want to sell the ranch at a reduced price, not have the obligations on her shoulder. She doesn't want her son to die the same death as her husband. They continue across the river. As they continue across the river, 3 whirlwinds begin to spin around each individual horse and rider. The banker, what's going on? What's going on? The horse is shifting nervously around the water, swirling around them. And the money, the gold pieces in his pockets become heavy and heavy and heavy, pulling tight onto his jacket. What is going on? What is going on? And the gold becomes heavier and heavier. And one side is so heavy as if it's a huge stone packed into his pocket. He lunges out of the saddle and falls into the water. Help, 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 help. Gloop, gloop, gloop. And he's gone. Wendy is in the middle. She's also having her own hard time with the horse because the horse is panicking because of the whirlpool of water circling. It first becomes pink, dark pink, light red, blood red. She can't say anything. She tries to cry out to Lyle, help, help, but her voice, And she can do nothing to let her husband know, I'm in trouble. She reaches her hand out, trying to reach her husband, and the wind begins to nibble at the flesh of her hand, just like lies will nibble at the integrity of a soul that lies. She whimpers in pain, and her hand dissolves into the breeze. She tries to slap her legs against the flanks of the horse to prod it forward, out the river, and her legs dissolve into the water. And then her torso dissolves into the breeze. Lyle does not know about the death of the banker or the death of his wife. He is fighting his horse, trying to get the horse to cooperate, get it out of the river as the whirlwind circles. Pink, dark pink, light red, blood red. He's panicking. The horse lunges to try to get from under him, but he holds on tight. And then a sharp shaft of a stick, stabs him into the side. Another stick from downstream comes up. Stab, 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 like the teeth of the trap. Spikes, stab, Finally, a particularly large stick slams into his belly, knocks him off the horse. Glop, glop, glop. The three horses reach the other side of the river and are riderless. Half-mile back up the river, Michelle is finished with her laundry of washing her husband's clothes. As she pulls away the cloth to take it home, a piece catches. She thinks it's a stick, but as she pulls it tight, she sees a gold piece in the material. And other gold pieces that she doesn't know came from the banker Jones begins to rise from the mud. What is this from? She knows it's their property. Tar, did you put gold in the river? Weren't you worried about it floating downstream? Weren't you worried about sinking into the mud? But the gold coins are on the surface. Realizing that her husband's money can help her continue on with the prosperity of her ranch, she returns home. Thank you.
Next up, also returning to the Angelus stage is Mary Hokanson. Inspired by Donald Davis, Mary and husband Devon began storytelling in 2014. Mary enjoys telling folk tales while Devon tells original tales and stories of his childhood. They also perform in tandem. Mary Hokanson, ladies and gentlemen.
When the fledgling United States began to expand, pioneers, many of them in wagon trains, began pushing the frontier further and further west. Along the well-traveled routes, towns sprang up because they were able to give some extra rest and restocking to the travelers as they went. They were very popular. The town that we're talking about now is just such a little restocking town, and the people were shivering into winter. A wagon train had come and parked just outside the town. It was only 4 wagons. They were debating whether they should stay or go because they felt that the weather was so bad that perhaps they should winter there. James Burns was the proprietor of the general store. He was bone tired. He had been helping supply the wagon trains, and now he was bringing things from his storeroom and stocking his shelves so that everything would be ready for the morning. All he wanted to do was go to his apartment upstairs over the store, eat the dinner his sweet wife had made, and snuggle down under an eiderdown quilt. But when he turned around, directly across from him, there stood a lady whose long, dark hair had lost all of its luster. She was wearing just a flimsy nightdress. "Hello, ma'am. May I help you?" "Oh, sir, please, I need milk for my baby daughter." "Ma'am, I've got some in the back. I'll go get that right away." And he brought out 2 bottles of milk. "Will these do?" "Yes. But, sir, I have no money." She reached to her ear and displayed a beautiful earring, a pearl with luster such as James had never seen. "Will this be enough?" "Oh, ma'am, that is beautiful. Where did you get it?" "It was willed to me by my mother, and it was willed to her by her mother." "Ma'am, you just keep that in the family. That should not be spent. Just take the milk." In fact, he reached under the counter and pulled out a shawl, a beautiful, heavy woolen shawl. He said, "Please, ma'am, you'll catch your death of cold. You need to wear this." "I'm not cold," she said, "but my baby needs it." Clutching the shawl and the bottles of milk, she said, "Bless you. Thank you." With the blessing, James had respectfully bowed his head. When he looked up, she was gone, and the bell attached to his door had not rung. It was strange. It hadn't rung when she came in. Oh well. But when he looked down, there was that earring. He locked it up and went upstairs for the evening. The next morning, the wind was swirling and swirling and swirling all over the place with snowflakes flying. Nobody went out that day unless they absolutely had to, and James had a very boring day with only a few customers. He decided to close up early. And as he was restocking the last tin on the shelf and turned around, there she was again. And the bell on the door hadn't rung this time either. "Do you need more milk, ma'am?" "Yes, I do." So he went out back and brought in 2 more bottles. And she said, I have this to pay." And she held out a beautiful rosary. The beads were semi-precious stones, and the crucifix was that big, pure silver, beautifully carved. "This is real silver. You will do well with it." "No, ma'am. No, I would not disturb your holy beads. The earring you left yesterday will pay for this and for everything you need, even if you stay the whole winter. Please, whatever you need, you come to me and it's yours." She looked at him. "Bless you. Thank you." His head went down again, and when he raised his head again, she was gone, and the bell on the door hadn't rung. He didn't sleep well that night. It was really rough, turning and thinking about her and thinking about the bell on the door and the baby and all of this. And he made up his mind that early the next morning he would go to see Doc, because surely with a new baby delivery, the doc would have been involved. So he bundled up and fought against the wind, which was still swirling and swirling. And he went to Doc's. Doc sat him down, gave him a cup of steaming hot coffee, and said, "Now tell me what's on your mind." he told the story. At the end, Doc just jumped up and said, "Come on, there's no time to waste." They ran to the sheriff's, and the sheriff sent his deputy to the wagon train, told them to bring all of the men they could and shovels. Meanwhile, they went to the graveyard, and Doc told James, the description of that woman matches the description of a woman who died in childbirth 3 nights ago. She and the baby girl died. Well, the men from the wagon train came and dug up the grave, and when they opened the casket, James's knees just buckled. There, in the casket, were 4 empty milk bottles. And laying there was the woman he had seen for the last 2 nights. On her one ear, she had an earring, the other was missing. And there was a beautiful rosary in her hand, and under her arm was a baby wrapped in the shawl that he had given, barely alive. Doc went immediately and pried the baby from the cold, hard arms and took it to the father, who was standing close in shock. The grave was reburied and filled. Everyone went their own way. James went to the father and handed him that one earring. He said, "The value of this may carry you through hard times. Otherwise, it's a wonderful heritage for your daughter." He went on up to the store as the wind continues to swirl and swirl. And as he approached the store, in the wind, he heard, "Bless you, thank you."
Next up is the terrifying Tyler Griffith. Ty Griff has been telling stories his whole life. Sure, he sings, dances, and acts, but this will be his 6th time competing in this competition, and he loves participating in this contest more than any other Halloween tradition he currently practices. Tyler Griffith, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. I adapted this story from the horror rock song Lake Pontchartrain by the band Ludo. And if you haven't heard them, I highly recommend them. One other quick aside, you think you don't know Lake Pontchartrain, but I'll bet you do. You see, most people remember Hurricane Katrina, and the levees broke and the waters that rushed forth nearly consumed the entire city of New Orleans. Those were the waters of Lake Pontchartrain. And it's a 666 square mile freshwater lake that's actually the remnant of a vast inland sea that went all the way up the Mississippi Valley into Ohio. And so, after millions of years, it's receded to what it is now. And what is currently still living in Lake Pontchartrain, no man can say. I'll tell it like it happened. It was Darius and Nolan and me, just 3 best friends from high school. You know, and we were late 20s, still working our dead-end jobs, and, you know, we'd wasted much of our youth. It's easy to do that when you live in the south of the United States. We lived in southern Missouri, and we spent way too many lazy afternoons catching fish at the riverside, or searching for crawfish to eat, or looking for frogs, tadpoles, that kind of thing. And when we were in school, we paid way more attention to the football team and how they were doing than to our studies. So consequently, we're still working our hard manual labor jobs in our nowhere town. And to get away from the misery of the week, we would often, on the weekends, take little road trips out into the countryside near us. And, I think deep down, we were probably looking for a way out of our nowhere town and our dead-end jobs, but we never said that out loud. Anyway, on the weekend in question, we headed south on the 55 toward Louisiana. And we thought that it was a fine day to go, partly cloudy. It was going to be a great day. And we knew that if we watched out for places along the way, we could find one of these out-of-the-way places to get some good Southern cooking. Places typically only the locals know about. So, after a few hours of driving south, we got off the highway on a little dirt road that led to a little shack diner. Run down looking, one of these places where the lichen and the vines hang down from the eaves, and it smells mildewy and wet, even though it's a dry summer's day so far. So we wander in this place, not too worried about that, because again, this could be one of these awesome places to get good Southern cooking. And to be honest, when we walked in, we noticed that there was a lot of wear on just about everything. Holes in the upholstery, and there was even a little rusted old countertop radio playing Southern Soul. "Sit down, honeys, if you want something to eat," came the old lady from the kitchen. We could just see her in the back. Now, she said it in a very unpleasantly fake, less welcoming way, but the smell coming out of the kitchen was intoxicating. And that was all that we needed. So we sat down, and Darius and Nolan had crawfish, strictly chicken for me, and it was good. But what I remember most about that meal was towards the end, there was a clap of thunder, and the lights flickered in the place, and the song on the radio skipped. And when it came back on, there was not music anymore, but a weird commercial or kind of a radio program of sorts. It was saying, "Come down to Lake Pontchartrain, rest your soul and feed your brain. That's where you will get to see everything the water can be. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain, rest your soul and feed your brain. That's where you will get to see everything the water can be." It repeated like that, over and over, like a broken record, but not necessarily exactly the same. And the more that it repeated, the creepier it seemed. So we left cash enough for a pretty good tip, and we got out of there. Now, we were a little bit surprised to see as we walked out under thick thunderheads how bad the weather had turned. So when we hopped in the car and got back on the road, we decided to go straight back to the highway. It's a good thing, too, because just as we did, that thunderhead above us burst, and it started raining. Now, this is rain in the south, where it really rains. I mean, the wind is howling, and the thunder and lightning are crashing, and the rain's coming down in sheets thick as lead. That's where that saying comes from. Anyway, we continued on, even though it was terrible. One of these nights that makes you feel like the whole world could be going to hell. And we kept on for about an hour until Nolan finally admitted that he didn't know exactly where we were according to the map. So we pulled off near the Choctaw Motel to decide what we were going to do. Darius actually suggested that we sleep there for the night, but none of us were very tired. It wasn't very late. And so we were arguing about what we should do when Nolan froze, looking out the window toward the bayou. And Darius and I followed his gaze to see a man stumbling out of the water, looking like the lake had a tongue. And before we knew it, he was all up on a glass of a windshield, yellow-eyed, black teeth, screaming like a demon at the top of his lungs. "Come down to Lake Pontchartrain, rest your soul and feed your brains. That's where you will get to see everything the water can be. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Pontchartrain. Free for you and all your friends. Crawfish till the bitter end. That's where you will get to see everything the water can be. Wade to where the shallows break. That's where you will get to see everything the water can be. Well, I was driving out of there just as fast as a Camry could. And we weren't more than about a quarter mile down the road when we saw the flashing lights that let us know that the highway was closed because of the flooding. And we panicked looking back, thinking we could just make out the figure of that man still coming towards us. Now, we also noticed that there was a road off the highway, dirt, into the woods. And we took it just to keep going. Bad move, in retrospect, because it wasn't long before the road completely washed away in the rain, and it was like we were driving through a shallow river rather than a road. But we followed it because the water seemed to be taking us on the most clear route through the woods, away from whatever might still be following us. Turns out, we shouldn't have trusted the water. We kept going, following it for about 20 minutes. And I had this moment of beautiful, pristine hope, where it looked like we were coming out of the woods into a clearing. But my stomach lurched and I stood on the brakes when I saw the sign, Lake Pontchartrain. We sat there, horrified, watching the lake thrash and writhe in what I thought was the fury of the storm. The next couple of things that happened really fast. I couldn't react. Darius was yelling that he saw somebody out in the swells. He jumped out of the car running towards the water, and Nolan was going as well. Come back! Why the heck would they leave the car? That's what people in horror movies do. So, that was right when I heard it. Make no mistake, I know what I heard. The voices were coming up from under the lake. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Quiet at first. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Louder, more insistent. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. The crawfish were screaming, the waves thrashed and crashed, and I looked as my friends went in deeper, and the water seemed to climb them. And then I stood there frozen as the lake opened wide and horribly roaring, it pulled them inside. 1 minute they're there, the next they were gone. Swallowed by that horrible, writhing, monstrous lake. Now I know what you're thinking. The feds laughed at me when I told this story. And most people just call me crazy or a homicidal maniac to my face when I tell them. But that's how it happened. Why would I lie? Why would I choose this one? There are no bodies. I've got none to hide. I'm just a kid who lost his friends in the rain. And if you've got any more smart alecky questions, I'll tell you what I told the feds. You go and ask Lake Pontchartrain.
Lin Wing has entertained audiences as far away as Russia to as close as her front room with folk tales, mostly true personal stories, outright lies, and haunted tales. Lin has won and placed in multiple Utah hauntings contests. Lin Wing.
Thomas T. Thompson, he was a kind boy, quiet, came from a small family. His mom and daddy, they were farmers, and there was this little sister, little Sarah. Oh, little Sarah, she was fond of Thomas T. And Thomas T., he was fond of little Sarah. But Thomas T. wasn't very fond of farming, and he did not take too kindly to schooling. Now, what Thomas T. liked to do is, well, he liked to go up into the woods that covered the hills that circled around their valley, and he'd go tramping. Yes, every moment he could, he was out there. It's like it was home to him. As soon as the chores was done or the schooling was over, there'd be Thomas T. He would be up there all alone as always, kind of like that one morning when he came upon a tall hill. It was steep. Now, Thomas T. had seen this hill before, but he'd never climbed it before. Decided he'd give it a try, so he climbed up to the top, and when he looked down, well, he was surprised to see a hollow he had never seen before. It was long and fairly narrow. It had deep grass on the bottom of there, and of course there was the hill on one side, and on the other three sides were just a rolling of the woods. But I think what most likely had caught Thomas T.'s attention was a line. That line was right in the middle, and there on that grass, you could see it as clear as day because it was dark green and the rest of the grass was light green. And it was about maybe 1-2 foot long, and the ends of it tilted up like it was grinning at him, saying, "Welcome." With Thomas T., he took advantage of that invitation and he started working his way down that hill. But something on the edge there caught his attention. He looked over. It was a rabbit. So he stopped himself and he took pleasure in watching the animals. And he watched that little rabbit, and it was hopping along, and it started leaping. And it would leap high and down and high and down and high, and it started coming down right above that grin. When that grin, without any warning, opened up into this gap in blackness, and that poor rabbit just dropped right inside and disappeared. And the grin closed, leaving no sign of its victim. What? First, Thomas T. was frozen in horror, watching that grin swallow that rabbit whole like that. But as soon as that grin closed, Thomas T. smiled. He was filled to the brim with this most amazing power. He couldn't breathe. He was so excited. He said it was glorious. But then he caught himself. He wanted to be certain that there were other animals. He wasn't scaring them away because they might go down and be by that grin. He wanted to be as close to that grin as possible. So he hunkered down on that hillside and he waited. A fox came by, a skunk came in, but they never got close enough to the grin to pay no mind to. Then came the doe with 2 fawns. Thomas T. watched them closely, and they were grazing. And the doe, she would graze, she'd take a few steps and graze and take a few steps, and she got closer and closer to that grin. And Thomas T. was up there on the hillside saying, come on, just one more step. And the doe's hoof, it was right on the edge of that grin, and it opened up, and the deer fell inside, and it closed. Oh, the ecstasy. It brought tears to his eyes. I can't say how many victims that grin had that day, but I can tell you this. I've been told that whenever that grin swallows somebody, it grows bigger. Well, Thomas T., he got home late that night after the evening chores, and his daddy said, "Boy, where you been?" And Thomas T., he just sneered at his daddy, turned his back to him, and walked away. Well, his daddy he didn't know what to do, so he did nothing. But the next morning, Thomas T., he snuck off into the woods, and he was before morning chores, and he didn't come home again until long after evening chores. Well, he got the switch that day. And every time that switch hit his backside, Thomas T. smiled. It was like Thomas T. was no longer Thomas T. He sassed his mama. He was disrespectful to the teacher, Miss Harmony. And Orville Harvey, oh, he was the biggest and meanest boy at the schoolhouse. Well, when he pushed little Sarah on the ground for being in the way, Thomas T., he charged at that big bully. He's half the size of the boy, and he knocked him to the ground. And oh, there was a scuffle. It only ended when Mrs. Harmony came out and blew her whistle. Boys had to stay late after school. Orville, when they came out of detention, he grabbed a hold of Thomas T. and he slammed him against the wall of the schoolhouse. And Thomas T., he laughed. You think you scare me? You ain't nothing compared to what I've seen. What you talking about? Why don't you come into the woods with me and I'll show you. Now, Orville, he was about as ignorant as he was big. And he just, well, curiosity had bitten him, and so he followed Thomas T. into the woods. And from behind the sycamore tree by the schoolhouse, out stepped little Sarah. You see, she was concerned what Orville might do after detention, so she had waited for them. But they were going into the woods, and so she decided that she'd follow him. Not too much of a hike for Thomas T., but it is a ways to go from the schoolhouse to that holler. And by the time Orville got to the top of that hill, he was puffing like a steam engine. Thomas T. said, "You see that line down there? It goes over there, all the way over to there. Looks like it's grinning. So let's go on down and take a look." Thomas T., he bounded down that hillside like a sure-footed buck. Oh, Orville, he was stumbling and falling and cussing like a storm, and when he finally reached even ground, he looked at that boy and he said, "I was going to tear you in two. I'm right here." And Thomas T. just stood there with a grin on his face, laughing at him. And Orville, he charged at him, and Thomas T. stepped aside and let him go right on by. And he turned, Orville did, and he had a fire in his eyes, and he started charging, not noticing the ground that was moving behind him. But Thomas T., he saw it. And when Orville, he looked behind him, and when he saw that blackness opening up behind him, he started running towards Thomas T. as fast away from that blackness as he could. But he ran right into Thomas T., and Thomas T., with all the strength and power of that grin, he started pushing Orville, and he pushed him, and he pushed him. And Orville, he was screaming for mercy, and he screamed for mercy until he disappeared into the blackness. What are you doing? Stop it! Stop it! Thomas T. looked up the hillside, and here come little Sarah, and she was shaking, and she was crying and screaming and all. And Thomas T. was so shocked to see her that he stepped back, but there was nothing to step into except for the blackness. And the grin closed. And little Sarah, she smiled.
Our final teller tonight is Michaela Holmes. Michaela Holmes likes crescent moons and walks through cemeteries. When she's not making music videos with her cat, you will find her hot tubbing in a cauldron or flying high on a broomstick. She also likes to spin a spooky yarn here and there. Michaela Holmes.
If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Lucy and Esther, 12-year-old identical twin sisters, were on their way home with their ma after a day of sledding in the mountains. Lucy and Ma were belting the song they always sang whenever Esther was in a mood. "Ma, close your window, I'm freezing," Esther said. Ma glanced at Lucy in the rearview mirror, and they grinned at one another and started up again. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. I'm unhappy, and you know it, so I'm really gonna show it, Esther interrupted. Okay, you've made your point, Ma said, flashing a stern look at Esther over her shoulder. Ma, watch out! Lucy shouted, pointing at the doe that had bounded into the road. Ma pulled her steering wheel to the right to dodge the doe, but in those icy conditions, the car slipped right off the road and they started down the hillside. Horror gripped them as they saw they were heading directly toward the lake. Faster and faster they went, and whoosh! The car flew over the ledge of the lake and plunged into the freezing water. It all happened so quickly. Water pounded through Ma's open window and tugged the front of the car below the surface. The trunk of the car was still above the surface, but it was starting to drop. Ma unbuckled her seatbelt. Her baby girls! She was desperate for air, but she had to save them. She turned and reached into the back of the car. Unable to see a thing, her fingers searched frantically for the seatbelt buckles. There, she found one and freed the belt. She maneuvered the girl to the front of the car and wrestled herself and her daughter through the window as the car dipped further down. They emerged, gasping for air. Ma, what about Esther? Swim, Ma said, letting go of Lucy. She ducked back under the water. But at that moment, the back end of the car dropped below the surface and the car began to sink. Ma chased after it, but it plummeted faster, 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 out of reach. Days later, when the car was retrieved, Esther wasn't inside, but her body never surfaced. The following weeks were agony. The funeral, the burial of an empty coffin. Ma was racked with grief. She had failed to rescue her child. But worst of all was the guilt. The guilt that came with knowing that she had saved her favorite. Had she deliberately chosen Lucy? Had she subconsciously rescued one over the other? As terrible as it was for Ma, it was worse for Lucy. You know what they say about twins, 2 parts of a whole. Lucy and Esther had literally shared an identity. No one had been able to tell them apart. They had harnessed their identical appearance to pull pranks and entertain loved ones. For example, at the family's annual Christmas talent show, Lucy and Esther had put on the exact same act since they were 7, simply because it was such a hit. The show went like this. The twins would stand on either side of a large cardboard frame that represented a mirror. Lucy played the part of a person getting ready, while Esther acted as her reflection. The effect was flawless. Esther truly looked like Lucy's mirror image. The twins then added humor to the performance. Lucy would do something like lean in close to the mirror to carefully apply lipstick, only to watch in dismay as her reflection drew red lipstick all over its face. They made their family roar with laughter every year. And now, Lucy felt as if she had been cut in half. Grief gnawed at her insides, and a deep ache crawled through her body. Esther was trapped somewhere in the icy lake, and Lucy could feel that ice in her bones, the phantom pain of a lost twin. One evening, after Lucy had showered and climbed into bed, she found she could not settle down. Something in the back of her mind was letting her know that something wasn't right. Her hair! It was bone dry. Then why, when she had glanced at her reflection on the way out of the bathroom, had her hair been dripping wet? She got out of bed and crept to the bathroom. She stood in front of the mirror and flicked on the light. Yes, her hair in the mirror was dripping wet. She paused, trying to make sense of the image, when suddenly her reflection's lips curled into a smile. I wondered when you would notice, said her reflection. Lucy's blood turned cold. Esther, how is this happening? All I know is that I'm on the wrong side of this mirror, Esther said. The reason we crashed is because you and Ma ganged up on me. No, it was just an accident. Then why did Ma save you, her precious Lucy? Was that just an accident? It should have been you who drowned. Lucy slammed off the light. She ran back to bed and sobbed into her pillow. She could not tell Ma. She could not add to her mother's guilt. The next day, Lucy blinked open her eyes. In the warm light of day, she wondered if she had dreamed the whole thing. But she had to check. She tiptoed to the bathroom, poked her head around the wall, and there was Esther in the mirror, dripping wet. Lucy jumped backward. Come back here, you coward, Esther spat. Lucy grabbed a blanket from her bedroom and quickly draped it over the mirror, tucking it over the top of the frame. And Esther said nothing more. Several days later, Lucy pulled back a corner of the blanket. Esther was still there. Her sunken eyes were closed and surrounded with charcoal rings. Her waterlogged skin was gray. Her eyes flew open. It should have been you, she screamed. Lucy dropped the blanket back down. This went on and on. Every day Lucy would check the mirror, and every day Esther would still be there and spew her fury. Then, one day, Lucy heard Esther crying. Her sobs grew louder and louder. Lucy approached the mirror. Why are you crying, Esther? I'm sorry, Lucy. I should have never blamed you. It was just an accident. Do you forgive me? Of course I forgive you. I want to see you, Esther said. Please, can I see you? Lucy hesitated, but then she reached up and pulled the blanket off the mirror. Esther's gray and purple skin was bubbled and peeling. Her eyes were misted and milky. Lucy tried to hide her horror. I'm so happy to see you, Esther said. Come a little closer so I can see you better. Lucy took a step forward. Closer, she insisted, and she raised a rotted hand toward her sister. Instinctively, Lucy reached out her hand, and just as their fingertips were about to meet, Esther reached beyond the glass and yanked Lucy through the mirror. Ma was downstairs preparing a meal. Lucy, she called, dinner's ready. Her daughter appeared at the top of the stairs. Ma squinted up at her in the dim light. My darling, why are you wet? Go and dry yourself before you catch your death. But her daughter started to descend the stairs. And she began to sing. I'm unhappy and you know it, so I'm really going to show it.
Michaela Holmes, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, now, give me a drum roll, please. In third place for the 2023 Utah Hauntings Contest, according to the voice of the audience, is Lin Wing. In second place, drum roll, Mary Hokinson. First place winner and the winner of Utah's Hauntings 2023, aka the scariest storyteller in Utah, is Michaela Holmes. The votes were all very close. Everyone did fantastic. Thank you so much, and we hope you will come back next year.